My name is Nash Carroll, and today we're going to be talking about black representation, more specifically misrepresentation, but black representation in horror films, and then more specifically, how that affects black horror films with predominantly black casts, or the main protagonist's race is the key point of the story. To organize this, we're going to be talking about three specific films: William Bodine's Lucky Ghost, Bob Keljon's Scream Blackula Scream, and Jordan Peele's Get Out. These films are perfect for their clear evolution over the span of their productions about how black representations have changed over time. Starting with Lucky Ghost, it's about two black men coming into this new town, looking for cheap ways to get rich quickly, and eventually finding themselves in charge of a haunted club. Generally for this film, their being black isn't too important to the actual story of Lucky Ghost, but it's important to note how differently this story most likely would have played out had the director chosen white actors. They start the movie broke, end up getting beat and scared nearly to death, and by the end of it aren't left with a single penny. How are we to know that in a time period so dominated by racism that the specific plot point was only employed to influence audiences to view the black characters and other blacks that they know in real life as schemy and poor? This movie may not have seemed to use many stereotypes, not even having a single black character, but William Bodine, a white man, made sure to fit in his tropes into most of the characters' archetypes. Our main two protagonists, Jefferson and Washington, have recently been fired for being poor employees at their previous jobs and are looking for a quick way to get rich. The two decide to play dice with rich men and end up stealing everything they have as they used faulty dice. This demonstration of their laziness is a key factor in the coon stereotype meant to depict African Americans as dumb and grimy, and was created to show whites that blacks weren't fit for society. And Bodine's depiction doesn't stray too far from this either, with the men remaining broke at the end of the story. He also didn't let his female cast escape unscathed, as the only female unnamed character with a speaking part is a messy depiction of the welfare queen stereotype before it ever existed. Coined in the 70s, welfare queen referred to a black woman who'd rather live off state money than work, and this is similar to what this hostess does. She switches her allegiance to the wealthiest man in the room anytime he is present, attempting to get money through marriage rather than work. An article by Claudia Bucciferro writes about how narrative tropes can minimize the presence of black community and black women who remain marginalized, and this is due to, as Bucciferro says, the white gaze, which is a choice the director took when he chose to assume the majority of the audience watching was white. This can be seen in the wealth of black men in this made-up town. It's a small town, but there are enough rich black men and women to fill a ballroom, and while Bodine's intent wasn't to let white audiences relate to the black characters, it was most likely to make fun of them. This can also be seen in the fact that the movie is far from scary, striving to be comedic at most times, with the black characters at the butt of the jokes.
That's guilty. Judge, Your Honor, not guilty. Me and my partner was walking down the street tending to our own business. But
Lucky Ghost masks its racist intents behind a fun African-American cast and is a great example of what not to do when making a black horror film. It's one of the main reasons for common tropes that black characters fall into in horror films with a largely white cast, such as a first to die trope, which can be seen in movies like The Shining and is commonly made fun of in today's SNL or comedy skits. Next, we'll be moving into the era of blaxploitation, an era when black actors were exploited to gain an African-American audience by filmmakers, generally white. This era was still unfree from dangerous tropes, and what better movie to talk about than Scream Blackula Scream, the sequel to Blackula, and it is about a cult of voodoo users fighting over who should take control of their group. The son of the late leader thinks it should be him, as he is their only son, but the daughter Lisa and the rest of the cult think it should be her. The son, enraged, ends up summoning a vampire, Blackula, who gives him vampiric powers but makes him Blackula's slave. Blackula then takes over their whole cult in order to get control of Lisa, who is a powerful voodoo user that wants to take the curse of vampirism away from him. She's interrupted by police officers and they end up stabbing him in the heart, ending his story. It is really important that the characters are black because in the opening sequence, showing the cult all members are black, perhaps making them seem more foolish for being in a voodoo cult, as cults are generally very taboo, and the characters are also seen in very small buildings, demonstrating poverty that isn't seen too often in the rest of the film. Another key plot point is that the majority of the things that the characters are casually conversing about are African topics, like the history of Africa, African artifacts, and the list goes on. And while this isn't criminal in itself, it's disappointing to see that the writers couldn't come up with anything else for the characters to be interested in, including Blackula himself. This film employs many racist tropes, the most prominent one being what is referred to as the magical Negro, but for the purposes of this video essay and to remain politically correct, I will not be using that term anymore. But this trope is seen in the character Lisa, whom Blackula attempts to capture for the whole movie because, for whatever unexplained reason, she is the best voodoo magician in the world. This trope was created as a way to show blacks being subservient to whites and can be most prominently seen in movies like The Green Mile or Shawshank Redemption. While Lisa isn't serving a white man, the only purpose she serves in the movie is to heal Blackula and is unable to use her powers to help herself at any point in the movie and in any way at all. It is impossible to look over these glaring misrepresentations. Even if the movie is seen as a classic, it is still one of many blaxploitation films and fails to properly represent African Americans in a movie made for African Americans. A final postscript about Blackula is something to note that Blackula was directed by a black director and meant for black audiences, as that director himself wanted to make something that audiences, specifically African American audiences, could resonate with. However, Scream cut William Crane out for the other director, a white man, who could not offer the same insights and help. And I think that is a lot of where these racist tropes came from, because Blackula is such a popular cult classic that it is hard to understand why the sequel would be so politically incorrect and, I guess, abusive of black tropes, and basically the first one's success for the second one and all of its subservient ideas and stereotypes. On to the next one. Finally, we'll be covering the latest evolution of black representation in horror set in place by Jordan Peele's Get Out. This story is about a black man, Chris, visiting his girlfriend's family for the weekend, and his being black is the entire premise of the story. There were a series of uncoverings, both to the audience and to Chris, that this family is far from normal, and he was invited with far from normal intentions. They, including his girlfriend, intended to auction him off as a host body for a brain transplant for the highest bidder. Once Chris becomes aware of this, he embarks on his escape, to which there are many obstacles, such as his now girlfriend's entire family. He barely manages to escape with the help of his friend Rod. Jordan Peele created this movie to pay homage to the butchered black horror films of before, and successfully delivers a very tasteful film free of racist tropes. It provides both an Uncle Tom and Mamie character that are constructed very intentionally. In a conversation between Chris and Georgina, one of their black housemaids, she's talking about how much she loves working for the family, but she's crying as she's talking about it normally. This is alluding to the fact that all she says and does is simply a mask that only Georgiana's tears can escape from. This is a different Mamie as the one we see before in other movies, because the fact that she is this way is wrong, and it is portrayed as wrong within the context of the film. This film is the pinnacle of black horror and sets a fantastic precedent for future movies such as Peele's follow-up movie Us. It's imperative that blacks have proper representation, like in movies like Get Out and Us, in order to feel more accepted and represented within our media and our society. The main evolution of these films have been from white-oriented audiences to the poor exploitation of black audiences, and finally to properly serving and representing black audience members. It is unfortunate to have a past such as this when talking about our own produced media, but it is imperative to recognize it as such. If we can recognize it as Jordan Peele did, we can begin correcting the wrongs of our past and producing amazing, inclusive films such as he does.